And we're live. Hey, thank you to the Channel Focus band for such a great intro. Thank you everybody for joining. I believe that we are the one of the last two sessions of the day, and I really appreciate everybody coming in. I am Larry Walsh, the Chief Analyst at Channelnomics, and here we are to talk about influencers, who they are, and what you need to do to work with them. We've got a great panel. I want to just preface this conversation by saying that the topic of influencers does come up. We hear it frequently about how we would need to work with the right partners and the different types of partners out in the market, whether they're traditional resellers or integrators or service providers. But there's this nebulous class out there of influencers, and it's really, I actually find it difficult to talk about because when you think of influencers, of course my mind immediately goes to the Kardashians. And I can tell you that the influencers I come up across in the channel look nothing like them, and I say that mercifully. But the influencers come in different forms, and they're not just talking heads on TikTok. There is a number of company level actors and individual actors out there that have a tremendous sway, not only over partners but particularly over customers and their vendor and product considerations and how they choose to purchase and who they purchase. So we're going to have a conversation about all of this. And joining me, I'm going to actually allow my panelists to do a little brief intros of themselves. I'm going to start with Brad Tompkins. He's the President and Chief Operating Officer at Workspot. Brad, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get in?
Sure, Larry, thanks. And thanks for having me. So Brad Tompkins, President, COO at Workspot. I've only been here for about 9 months. I was actually part of the Focus 50 group for a few years when I was at iGel. So it's great to be back with you guys, and I'm very happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation about influencers. Thanks.
Fantastic. Now I'm going to turn to my old friend, Jamie Mendez. She's the Vice President of Partner Strategy and Programs at Pegasystems. Jamie, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and Pega?
Thanks, Larry, and I'm also delighted to join the team here and have this conversation because this is very important in our go-to-market strategy and execution. For those of you who may not know Pegasystems, we are arguably the leading company in the enterprise AI decisioning and workflow automation space. That's a mouthful, but essentially we are a platform that enables organizations to develop bespoke solutions to address their business opportunities and challenges. And influencers play a huge role in what we're focused on and how we go to market, because there are a variety of considerations that clients have to factor into the solutions and the ways that they're solving their challenges. So this is very much top of conversation across our organization and how we work with our partners and design our partner program.
Fantastic. And also, rounding out our panel, Shawn Toldo. He is the Senior Vice President of Global Partner Ecosystems at OneTrust. Shawn, a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Larry. Shawn Toldo, coming to you live from Seattle. Appreciate the Kardashian reference as well. It's very nice. Thank you. So lead the global partner business here at OneTrust. Been here about 18 months. Been in a variety of partner roles over my career. Excited about the opportunity to talk about influencers, which could take a lot of different meaning, both from an internal perspective, external perspective, and have the opportunity to banter about with this great group of people.
Fantastic. And Shawn, I'm glad you appreciate it. And I can tell you, the Kardashians, the resemblance is uncanny.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'll be sure to tell the folks in the neighborhood here that one.
So look, I wanted everybody listening in on this, please, let's treat this like a conversation. If you have questions, you have something you want to add to the conversation, put it in the chat. I want to keep this fun and lively since it is the last session. But before we get into it, I do want to set some parameters on this. Is like, what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about an influencer? And I could take this in a number of directions and say, okay, that's an influencer, that's an influencer. From your perspective, all of you, what do you define as an influencer?
I'll jump in. I mean, Shawn talked about internal and external. So I think, if you think about the target around your client, you're thinking about all the other organizations who play a role in affecting the decision about your offerings in their tech stack, whatever that is, right? So for us, a big part of our go-to-market is around decisioning and how we affect customer service and agents, and a lot of domain knowledge has to come into play when we create solutions or talk with clients about the solutions, and who affects those decisions. There are other technology suppliers who build complementary technology. It may be sales training companies. It may be suppliers that bring part of the solution forward. When we look at marketing domains that we play in, we're working with the digital marketing agencies and looking at how they review the MarTech stack and what recommendations they're making as they're putting together the marketing strategies for those clients to go execute. So a lot of suppliers that surround the actual work that has to be done that could have a say in how your clients approach their decisions.
Shawn, how about you? What's your thoughts?
I think of it as like, who can help or hurt your desired outcome? And if you kind of step back and take that lens and then try to kind of almost, define your relationship map from an influence perspective, that answer could be very different depending on different situations that you're in. And so for me, it's really like defining your desired outcome, like I had mentioned, and then who's going to be who can help, who can hurt, and actually, who can actually get it over the line, so to speak, that you're trying to make happen. So those would be my comments, Larry.
Yeah. Okay. Brad, before we move on, how about you?
Yeah, I don't think I can add too much of those. It pretty much covers everything. I mean, obviously there are people that can help and people that can say no, right? And of course, there are outside influences as well around social media communities, for example. There's so many ways to look at how people can influence what you're trying to do. It can be daunting for sure.
Yeah. So I want to make a distinction on this though, because listening to how you're all defining it, I often find myself betwixt on this, because you do have, as Brad was saying, there are external influencers, and Jamie, I think you framed it up well, saying that there are, influencers can be analysts, they could be other customers that are, making recommendations for or against. But then there's also influencers within the ecosystem, those that are interacting with the other partners that may not have a direct touch on the sale, but they have touch on the customer, they have touch on the technology. How do you have to come up with a different lines of thinking to be able to distinguish between them, to influence them, or do you feel like you have to influence them at all?
I personally think we all strive to influence entities and people that have a contact or a role within the decision making for our target clients. So yes, I think we're trying to influence those people, and I do think that you have to change the way you speak to them and what you talk to them about, because at the end of the day, each group has their win, right? What makes them successful, and how do you bridge the two topics? I'm not sure it's always a direct line of every win that you have for your client will directly translate to the influencer. You have to be able to speak in their terms and their wins and what makes them successful. So there is some level of understanding their business to have that conversation.
Yeah. Do you enable them? I mean, do you actually have to yes, you may have to communicate with them, but is it something you have to do persistently, or is it something you do on an engagement level? Like, you notice that there's an influencer in a deal, or there's an outside actor, or do you make this something that's more programmatic, more systemic, to say, yes, we're going to continue to message out to these people to hope that they will have a positive influence on your opportunities? Brad?
I'm going to tell you, for us, it depends. I don't know, yeah. Brad or Shawn, if you want to take that one.
I'll jump in and just say, I love what Jamie said about what's their win. You kind of ask that question over and over again for different folks that could potentially be involved in whatever process you're trying to get to a desired outcome on. If you ground on that, you're going to be okay. And I think, to your point, Larry, it can be structured or it can be unstructured. right? You can't kind of, I think, get too programmatic at times. A lot of times I hear that I think is a flaw is people say, we got to get to the C-level. And I go, well, who's going to build the case internally to go present to that C-level buyer that's going to sign off? But somebody inside of a customer is going to have to go make a business case and an ROI, and you're going to help them make a career potentially. So I think there's times that like some of those scenarios that I mentioned, like that's a really structured approach, and you might take a little unstructured influence approach to the C-level while you're trying to drive somebody to a desired outcome on your benefit as well. So Brad, I don't know if you have anything to add to that one as well.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we're not going to be able to make contact with all the influencers. It's not possible. Deals are so complex. Tech stacks are so complex with so many people involved, not just IT departments, but the actual business units themselves. The largest software deal I ever did when I was managing sales teams was almost $29 million. Never once spoke to the CIO. So doesn't mean it wouldn't have been better had I spoken to the CIO, right? But you don't have to. I think it's really good to train your teams on how to show value creation. I was reading a good article in Gartner this morning about, a proof of value versus a proof of concept. Proof of concepts are generally very technically oriented. Proof of value will have the technical piece of it, but also show the value creation that you're adding for that customer through ROIs or any of these other types of tools, right? So I would argue that it's impossible to touch all the influencers, and it's a hard job to even know who they all are. But we should be trying to do that so that we can have a strategy for each one of these avenues of people that can say yes or no.
Yeah. So Shawn and Brad, what you were just talking about in terms of, not having necessarily racing up to the C-suite, not talking to the CIO on the big deal. The entire sales process, though, is that when you look at the traditional models, there's always been the gatekeepers, there's always been the decision makers, there's always been the people who fund, and exactly what you're saying, Brad, about demonstrating the value. Is that what we're really talking about here, that type of influencer? Because again, making the distinction, because influence seems to be coming from multiple vectors, and where it seems like we're talking about that sales process and that decision-making process, which is seemingly done by committee now, more so than individual actors. So is that type of influence unchanged?
Brad, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it is unchanged in the sense that it's always been this way. There's more influencing going on from other pieces of the business, especially around. And I don't know if you guys see this, but almost everything has to have a security review and a privacy policy review these days, like everything. Yeah. And the reality is selling to a smallish organization doesn't take any less time than selling to a very large organization, because even small organizations, like we're less than 200 people, we still do the privacy checks, we still do the security reviews. I would hate to be selling to us, right, as a small company, right? And there's so many influencers that are salespeople or people that are selling to me actually don't even know exist. So it's a big challenge for sure. And then, of course, sorry to jump in, but there's also, we're talking about influencers in a sales cycle, right? But there's also things that are happening like in communities and things that are happening online in Reddit channels. And I mean, there's things I'm learning about in the digital world and where people go to seek advice and be influenced that I hadn't even heard of until 6 months ago. There's so much out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Shawn, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I might add, it's kind of an interesting one from this week. Past company that I worked for, very immature in their indirect model. Partner brings potential opportunity. I think it was 1.5, 1.7 million in software on a year one basis. And the partner was just purely wired, right? Selling into a healthcare entity. There's nothing that we could have done in a direct motion from a sales perspective to be successful. And I had to kind of, lay it down to basically say to our CRO, we've got this, trust us, we're going to get this done. 2 years later, I'm seeing Customer of the Year, Innovator of the Year awards happen with this person that led the project for this large healthcare entity that was a manager at the time, now is a senior director and continue to expand around some very valuable, I'll say some very value creation things that had to happen from a business process standpoint within that customer. In a direct fashion, we would have never got the deal done. But it was really interesting to see the power that the partner had, and that the person that made the case up was able to drive such a large expense. That was a manager level person at the time that owned the project. And so I kind of come back again to that, influencer from a career maker perspective. I just really believe in that. You're kind of making kings and queens as part of that process. And so it's worked really well in terms that I've seen with partners as well as with customers.
By definition, though, aren't our partners influencers of themselves? I mean, because oftentimes, look, one of the things that, again, it comes up frequently in conversations is that the reason why you want to know who the partner is talking to, who they're selling to, if they have they register a deal, first thing is you want to get your salesperson in the room with the customer. And why is that? Because you want to make sure that the partner is talking to them about you. So okay, I said the quiet part out loud, but isn't that the truth, though, is that the partner as well, is that even though they're selling, but they're also influencers in and of themselves?
Sure. Most partners have more than one relationship in which they're making decisions for best fit within that account. And based on their knowledge and understanding of your capabilities, they're going to make a recommendation, or they're going to position the technology one way or another. And you asked earlier about enablement. Do you enable these people? Absolutely. I mean, enabling your partner community, those that you have identified, has to be part of the rhythm of your business, and continually looking at, not only understand the technology, but the use cases, the options, the ways to get the greatest value out, as Brad said, that has to be part of your regular business with your partners. I think the tougher part is when you do have these outside influences, or you don't have all your influencers mapped, how are you making sure that the messages are getting to the right people and the buyers within the target account? Yeah. And that's where enablement becomes a little trickier, and identifying those communities, or having a formal or structured program, as you asked earlier. For me, and what we look at is, we know the Bains and the McKinseys are influencing some of the biggest accounts that we're working in, but they're never going to go to enablement, right? That's an engagement kind of conversation, a relationship, just like we build a network and we have influence with the people we stay in contact with regularly versus the ones we just connected one time to in LinkedIn. It's an ongoing nurturing thing of these individual big influencing consulting companies. On the other hand, if you're working with digital agencies or insurance companies or other kinds of companies, legal entities, accounting, staffing entities, you can, once they reach a certain level of influence within your overall business, then you want to structure it. Until then, as Shawn said, it may be unstructured because they're not as frequently involved in the deals you're doing. So I think you have to find ways to identify who's involved in your business on a regular basis, and start kind of tracking how often and what is the outcome. Are they really recommending you? Are they resulting in big deals? So some of that analysis has to be done before I would put any kind of structured investment in place for enabling them.
So Jamie, thanks for setting up the transition, because this is also, as we continue to embrace the concept of ecosystems, and recognizing that there are multiple actors often in sales opportunities. That there are companies that are directly involved in the sale, and there's companies that are on the periphery that will benefit from it. So you may have resellers and ISVs engaged in the sale, but the GSI that's there is going to benefit from that opportunity. How do you attribute who's contributing what influence? Is there any of you taking, as you said, Jamie, measure what's going on? Well, how do you actually, actually Beatrice is asking this question, which is a good transition, but how do you actually attribute what the influence is having, or what's the impact on it?
We do two measures. One is deal reg, and influencers can register opportunities and earn dollars for those that are eligible to earn, right? Like a McKinsey is never going to take money for it, but there are small influencers who are more than willing to earn a few bucks for bringing you a lead, getting you into the meeting and making sure that meeting happens. So you can measure that. The other thing that we have, because we are heavily involved in services and the success and value extraction from our product has to be related to services, we have project registration. And there are benefits for registering projects, getting extra help, getting support, getting new tools. So we try to provide incentives for partners to bring or entities to bring these activities to our attention. And then we start to see patterns and understand what's happening in the marketplace around our products.
Brad, Shawn, how about you guys?
Brad.
You know, I think, Shawn, you touched on this earlier. In order to try and understand the sphere of influence as good as you can, you really need a good mapping session, right? And if you're working with a strong partner that has a strong salesperson, you know, you should be able to sit down together and create that map. Now, generally the partner is going to have, as Jamie mentioned earlier, you know, more than one relationship. In fact, some relationships that probably have nothing to do with what you're trying to sell with that partner at the time. And you may be part of a much bigger project. This is why a map really helps. And that is about sitting down with the channel partner and working together on it. Both of you or each of you working in a vacuum doesn't really help in terms of understanding the sphere of influence.
And on the metric side, Larry, I've seen a lot, I guess I would say, in terms of how different companies have tried to do that. Different organizations I've ran have tried to do it. We've really streamlined it down to kind of three things in our world at OneTrust. One is around partner engagement. Sometimes we always try to pivot to, hey, what did partners source? But I think the value of influence is tremendous. So we look at partner engagement and we do look at partner source. So where are they bringing opportunities our way? The other thing is we look at where partners have done deployment and the health of the customer in the same way that our customer success team looks at it, so that we're able to say, hey, this partner is trusted, right, to our field, to our customer base, et cetera. So we've really narrowed in on those three areas. What's been interesting, though, is the level of integrations that are required to make our technology stack valuable to the customer base is probably, within our technology partner portfolio, maybe our biggest thing that we've had to focus on, because having those predictable integrations working so the stuff just works in the right way for the customers they would expect has been very meaningful for that. So we're also measuring that piece as well.
Sure. So we touched on this, and Jamie, you talked about the ability of your influencers to register. Rachel Teller, old friend of it, Channel Focus, is on here asking us, do you pay the incentives to your influencers? And I have to tell you is that this question has come up with us. You know, some of the vendors that we work with said, you know, look, we know that there are influencers in the deal, that they can make or break the opportunity, they can make or break the relationship. Do we comp them? And how do we comp them? Or even should we comp them? What do you guys think? Well,
we have a formal program around it, actually, and we do comp, but it has fences, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I would imagine
that might have heard about a deal over a cup of coffee at the diner, right?
Yeah.
So it's very formalized for us. It is limited to one influencer, right? So this is somebody that can come in and register it. We validate it, and we will pay them for that influence.
Yeah, very, very similar to Brad's comment on that. I would also say that in some ways, there's things where we pay, but there's also engagement benefits as well, right, that you have to think about. So if you think about co-selling and you think about access to our specialist teams, right, I'll take the core A's out, but like, if you really want to be a go-to partner in our specialist sales teams, you have to be a trusted partner that's capable in pre and post-sales activities. And so if a partner isn't, I'll shut it down, right? I will lean into the partners that have shown commitment and then gate access to those that can help them with what they're trying to position or sell, while we nurture some of the other partners that are coming along. So sometimes it's dollars, but sometimes it's a little bit intangible in terms of the ease of selling and the predictability of engagement that partners are looking for as well, or influencers are looking for.
Yeah, I think that the fine line that we all struggle with is what's really an influencer who fits the partner and wants to be in a partner program versus the influencer who wants to work with you because they know there's value creation going around your ecosystem, but they don't that's not their core business. They don't want to be your partner, right? They just, if they happen to through the course of their business, see something, they do want to be for going the extra mile to help you with it. So we're in the automotive space, right? We often will see that the after service and after manufacturing, the whole ecosystem around that, service companies can influence the technology that automotive is putting in. And there's a lot of consultants around that space. And we've had them come to us and say, hey, we need to understand your technology a little better because we think it might fit here. We don't want to join your program, but if we can help you, we'll invest time with you. And what we're saying to them is, great, bring us in. Here's what we need to say. And oh, by the way, we're not going to require you to be a part of our program, but you do have to get so far into the deal with us to earn that compensation. And we have rules around that. As Brad said, you got to be very tight in how you define what they get paid for and what they don't get paid for, or when they have to join your program or not join your program. So that is something for you to consider. Are these influencers people you want to pull in, or are you okay with them living on the periphery and making them, hunters for you in some way?
Yeah, what you're all describing though. Regardless, we've batted around a couple of different ideas or a couple of different definitions of what constitutes an influencer. And I think when it boils down to it, doesn't matter. It's whoever has the ear of the partner or the customer, right? But you're also describing things that require effort. So there has to be thought that puts into this. There has to be a strategy. There should be a program. And if you're going to do any level of incentives, whether that is monetary or non-monetary, there's a cost to it. And I think Ronan White is asking a good question regarding this, is saying that's, how do you convince your company to actually invest in this? Look, I've dealt with influence programs. I've dealt with referral programs, and they sound like they look like great ideas on paper, but they're often secondary or tertiary compared to the other primary routes to market. So how do you justify this from a cost benefit perspective?
So the way we did it is the way we typically do a cost benefit proposal around marketing programs. You have to show how it's going to turn into an opportunity, what that funnel looks like, what your qualifying rates, win rates are going to look like. And you have to have some evidence that the proposal that you have is true. And that's how we got approval for funding to do it.
Okay. And I would just build to say on the evidence point, never stop communicating the wins, right? You want the anecdotal information out there, right? There's the program piece that Jamie's talking about, but then it's, hey, with customer A, the partner X was in, right? We did this together. Those communications live, right? So I think being in the frequency of them, if you're hitting it up kind of once a week with something, once every couple weeks, it kind of gets a little more mind share than just kind of the program piece. So you kind of got to do both on the evidence. Kind of that guerrilla marketing piece works well as well.
Brad, you're the guy that signs off on this stuff. So how about you?
I would actually argue you don't always have to pay influencers and have a budget for it. Yeah. There are other types of partners that can help bring you into deals. For example, roughly 30% of our pipeline is from Google bringing us into deals because we spin the meter for them on their cloud. Mm-hmm. They don't care about our $100,000 or $500,000 deal. They care about the 10x drag that we bring in. Yeah. So they don't need compensation from me, right? So, it doesn't always have to be compensation. It's about finding the right partners where you're really actually going to help each other. If you can find that and fit that perfect little center of the Venn diagram, you can really go places.
So defining I like to describe that as defining the economic benefit. So where's the win-win for each other? And it doesn't necessarily mean I agree with you, Brad. You don't necessarily have to pay so long as the opportunity is there for both of you, right?
I think what we've hit on here, and we've kind of circled around, is there is no one answer to these. We just keep coming to, there's different types. And and it's probably a mix of things that are, we have to find the type that Brad's talking about. We have to do the things that Shawn's talking about, and both have commented on the sales process. We have to look at the program, or maybe you find that you have enough out of between the sales and the non-paid influencers. You don't need to have a program, and that's some of the work that you have to do, is to understand if you can get that expansion by investing some more money. For some companies, it can be a no.
Yeah, and I would say, it comes back to winning hearts and minds and earning trust at some level, right? And you can do that, to Jamie's point. You can do it programmatically. You can do it in a sales process. Just don't forget, you're either winning a heart and mind or you're losing. And that experience is going to build to what the real trust level is in the relationship. And I think if you keep those things in mind, you'll be successful in whatever desired outcome you're trying to get to.
So Shawn, double click on that for us though, is that, because I agree with you, is that whether you're dealing with a persistent relationship or an opportunistic relationship, which influencing can often be, how do you actually demonstrate that trust and build that trust amongst the influencers?
I think it's about commitment, time, and are you really helping them to their win, right? I mean, you have to lean into it. It sounds pretty basic, but I think sometimes folks get so busy they forget that part, right? And so, I think that just showing commitment and being helpful to a situation versus trying to find the why something won't happen. I think we were doing some prep. Brad had a great analogy, like I think you said a name. Who's the Bob? I think it was, right?
Yeah.
Who's the person? Yeah, you could tell it more than me. So,
well, so we're in a very competitive market, the VDI market, and we're competing against some longtime legacy players who have made people's careers, right, in the IT world. And so when we come in and we present, we think we built a better mousetrap. There's always at least one person that built their career on one of these legacy providers that's going to push back on every single little thing. And we've actually named them. We call them Bob. Oh, there's Bob. Bob's over there. And so we understand it. We get it. It's perfectly understandable. And I would probably be a Bob myself. I totally get it. But we need to be prepared for that as we're going through. So that's a potential negative influencer. But we've managed to turn almost every single one of them around. So, but it helps to identify them right away, actually.
They take longer to win that heart and mind, right? So you got to lean into that piece.
Yeah.
So Nikki Butler is making an observation that what she's hearing is that any partner type that's not reselling a product is an influencer, or could be an influencer. I like to say that is true. Like I said, I tend to think of partners as being influencers. We call them trusted advisors for a reason. But there are another class of partners, or potential partners, or potential influencers out there that are non-tech, that are also whispering in the ears of the customers and also playing influence. I mean, we hear about this, is that property managers, insurance companies, particularly cyber insurance companies, the accounting firms, legal firms, that they are actually having a true influence on what the customers are even considering, even before they get to the brand. Is that also part do you see those types of companies as being an expanded part of your ecosystems?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, 100%, especially like in the marketing space. I think there's probably some MarTech people on this call who know that marketing agencies are very much influencers in what they're doing. I mean, if a MarTech company is selling to me, I got to consider what are our marketing agencies doing and advising, and what tools are they using, and how are we going to connect together? 100%.
Yeah, and I'll add to Jamie's point. Like in our journey, so OneTrust has been around for about 8 years now. We started with kind of law firms were our big influencers around privacy and data governance, right? That's where that was kind of our, I'll say, influencer channel. And now today we're actually finding that because of so much data that's been collected over time and how privacy and data governance needs to work, the marketing side of the house is critical from an influencer perspective in terms of purchasing of our software or other customer data software of some kind, because they have to use it, right? They have to understand how to get to their customers effectively while considering things around data privacy and data governance. Now, we didn't even think about that 8 years ago, but now it's probably more prevalent over there from an influencer perspective. And the law firms still are there, but they're just not as big from an influence standpoint. So I think it can evolve as well.
Do you think that there are other actors that we're not cognizant of, or that we're not always thinking of as being influencers that we need to be more thoughtful about?
I would argue that people within an industry talk amongst themselves, even if they're competitors, especially at IT. So I think most of us would agree that if, for example, if you're selling into FSI and you take down one of the largest banks as your customer, they're going to tell everybody. And oh, by the way, if it didn't work out, they're going to tell everybody, right? Within their sphere of influence, within their group. And it's not just FSI, it's, well, pretty much all of them talk to each other. I've seen this over and over and over again. And so that's usually what it takes, is you get a foothold in a vertical with one large name or two large names, and then you're off to the races.
You know, you brought up Kardashians earlier as kind of a funny joke that we were all kind of laughing about. But the reality is, in this world of social, there are the bloggers and the influencers online that we often don't know about until they've, one, either impacted us positively or negatively, or they're so large that they've been influencing for a while and we didn't know. And that is probably the one that I think is the hardest one to get your arms around, is what is the social sphere doing? And do you have the right listening to really know who the individuals is? I think it's easy to identify companies. It's a lot harder to identify people that are making a name for themselves. It's tough.
Yeah. We have a few minutes left, so if anybody has any other questions, we can get to them. And Nikki's chiming in again, which I think is an interesting one, is that have you hit any issues with compliance or bribery rules?
Oh yeah,
and
you have to always exclude government and government-owned agencies. Number one, like there are lots of rules.
But the European Union also has anti-corruption and anti-influence laws as well, that you're not allowed to compensate certain entities for doing things. I mean, it is contextual or geographic in nature how you engage with influencers, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just make the statement to say, like, have a good legal partner, right? I'm lucky in my world today that I have somebody that's very experienced and somebody that I can lean on to keep us out of trouble on those things. But also we'll have balance and say, hey, this is low risk. You know, if it's the right thing for the business, go. And so I think having that type of guidance and relationship is really important. I lean on it a lot.
All right.
Well,
so
we also have to be careful. Sorry, we also have to be careful if we're trying to do things like spiffs and things like this for our channel partners, because you don't want to be sending them 1099s, right? So everything has to be programmatic, is what I've decided to do for how we pay anybody that in our channel. It's never a one-off. It's got to be part of the program. That keeps us out of trouble.
Yeah. And Brad, don't worry about sending me a 1099. I take cash. So
Cash is king.
All right. So I'm going to start winding us down here, and I'm going to come back to Beatrice and I think it's a good place to end on. What's the advice you give? Where do you start in building an influence program? What advice would you give to somebody who's just starting up on this?
Well, we're actually rebooting ours, so I'll just jump in, right? I'm working with internally and with external consultants on really projecting our brand. We're having a culture change within the company, and really we've changed our platform, and we're starting with community. And we're completely rebooting our current community is basically a document repository. And I would encourage everybody to look at their communities and see what they're really doing. We want to turn ours into a vibrant community. And I see that actually as the pillar of what we're trying to do for our corporate brand projection.
Jamie, Shawn?
I think Brad hit on a great point. I mean, we've had an influence program, but we are also looking at communities as another way of adding and enhancing that. I think that you've got to look at where the additional value creation is around your product and decide if those areas are areas for further exploration around influencers.
Very good.
And I would just add, like, know the persona that you're trying to influence, right? And then target accordingly. And when we've done that well, we've seen huge benefit. When we try to go a little bit too broad without really knowing the persona that we're trying to influence, it hasn't landed as well, right? So that'd be my one add to that as well, Larry.
Very good. Well, folks, we're going to wrap this up here. I think it's a good natural stopping point. I want to thank the panelists, Brad Tompkins and Jamie Mendez and Shawn Toldo. Please, thank you so much for joining and sharing your insights with us. And I want to thank everybody here for joining with us this afternoon. I hope you had a tremendous event. The closing session is going to be starting up here in a few minutes, and I encourage everybody to move over to there. And if you have any additional questions, please, just run them through Channel Focus, and they'll get them to the right people. So again, thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the event.
Thanks for a great event, Larry.
Thank you, Larry. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.